All right, just to start off this episode, I wanted to thank you for supporting us if you are supporting us. And by the way, we are trying to grow. If you want to help us grow, share this with others. Welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? My name is Andrew Noble. I'm here with Austin Gravely? Who
Bradley.
knows? And Joel Jacob. And we are going to figure out right now what's going on with Bluesky, why people are transferring over to it, and the rhetoric behind it, and if it's actually making sense. So let's start with context. What is Bluesky, and why are people switching over to it in droves? We talked about Threads a year ago. Threads is Meta's version of Twitter, and now Bluesky has just surpassed, as of right now, as of this recording, just been reported by Financial Times that, yeah, there's more people on Bluesky now after millions have logged into it in the last few days than Threads. So what's the context, Austin?
Yeah, so the context is that Bluesky was created by Jack Dorsey, the original founder of Twitter. When he left Twitter a couple of years ago, he went and created this Twitter clone. Sounds like a pejorative term, but it's not. It's a very strong has very strong semblance to original Twitter, but it was gated to exclusive invites. You had to be given an invitation to join the platform, and so it was gated for I think the first year and a half or so of the platform's existence. But recently, they opened the door to let anyone create an account just like you would on any other social media platform. And it had a small spike from that, but it was still this niche alternate social media platform, kind of in the nexus of Mastodon, which Mastodon's a whole separate subject, but Mastodon, Gab, Parler, all of these alternate new social media platforms that had kind of niche user bases. But then after the election, people from X were looking for an alternative, and a good number of them went to Threads. That originally Threads was the migration destination for a lot of people, but to be completely honest, I'm not a fan of Threads. From a user experience, it's not great. The algorithm is very unintuitive. It is a very poor imitation of what Twitter was. But then
Mark
people
Zuckerberg pretty much admitted that, like in one of the longer interviews that he did recently, he admitted that he's like trying to create something different than Twitter because he doesn't want it to be political. He doesn't want it to be like, I think Zuckerberg kind of has this weird sort of, he went through so much stuff politically with Facebook that he wants to stay away from. So he's like, I don't want to recreate Twitter. I want to create a nice, friendly space. But then it's like, well, people want to discuss politics and quote tweet each other about politics. And yeah, Threads isn't set up for discussion in the same way that Twitter is, or that Bluesky is, because Bluesky is similar.
But it still happens, though. I mean, Threads is very politically progressive, and there's no shortage of political conversation on Threads. But the quality of it is just much poorer, and the user experience, like the UI for Threads is very clunky. It's very slow. It's very unresponsive, and it's very limited. For coming out of Meta, it's actually kind of an underwhelming product. But then to go back to Bluesky, people remembered that, oh, hey, this other platform created by the guy who created Twitter is now open to the public. For the longest time, it wasn't. And then people started to check that out and realize that, like, okay, this scratches that itch that I'm looking for better than Threads does, which I agree with. I personally, of the two, I enjoy Bluesky significantly more in almost every aspect than I do Threads. It does feel like Twitter, which feels like old Twitter. It's smooth, it's responsive, like it functions just fine. And then as more and more people started to spread the word around that, I think the biggest trigger point was I think the biggest trigger point was word started getting around that Bluesky doesn't throttle links. And for a lot of people, that was the like, oh, really? This magical place doesn't throttle links? Like this platform called X, formerly known as Twitter, now does? I want to go to that place. And so a massive swath of people, like you were talking about earlier, have since joined the platform, a good number of which come from the circles that you and I and Joel kind of run in the conservative evangelical writing publishing sphere. A massive number of them have since either closed out their X accounts entirely or have just started over at Bluesky and are testing the waters out there and seeing if it's more active.
Can,
In
can you
Go ahead, Joel.
explain before you go on what is like throttling links mean?
Sure. Yeah,
How does
that's a
that
great
work?
question. So every social media platform, and this will get into some of the pushback I'll have about the migration of Bluesky here in a second. Every social media platform has an overwhelming incentive to keep you on that platform. They do not benefit when you leave the platform in any way. So anything that has a URL in it pointing to some other website, they have every interest in making sure you don't click that link and you don't leave their site, especially after I forget the name of I forget which Apple update specifically it was, but when Apple introduced an iOS update that prevented apps from tracking across apps, that was
Mhm.
a very very big blow, especially to Meta's business model, because if you click an Amazon link and it opens your Amazon app so you can maybe purchase something. Well, now Facebook doesn't see that. Facebook doesn't get any of that data. Facebook loses out on that.
So they used to
So,
have an incentive, then they lost the incentive, which is helpful to understand because I think some people miss that. They're just like, oh, they're just selfishly trying to keep people on their own site. Um, and well, obviously that's part of it still, but it's in the context of a business model and trying to figure
yes.
out a business model. And I think there is kind of like this vague appreciation for like an RSS feed. Like it's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
What is social media for? Is Twitter an RSS feed? Because I think it is in some ways. Like think about Tim Challies. He writes a weekly and daily blog, and in that daily blog, he has links to other things online. Now you can just rely on Challies, or you could follow someone like Challies on Twitter, like Andrew Wilson or something, and then Andrew Wilson might tweet out something like, here's the post of the day, you should read this. It's basically
Mhm.
doing the same thing as Challies, but he's doing it on Twitter instead of in a blog format. Blogs tended to go straight to inboxes or at least into an RSS feed, but then Google got rid of their RSS feed. So then people started to use Twitter for the RSS feed. So there was kind of this ecosystem 10 years ago with Twitter of it being like a place where you get your articles that you want to read from others. And so
Yes.
I can appreciate that desire. Sorry, that's the alarm for my baby monitor thing.
Ah.
But I can appreciate the desire for that to function and take place and to have an ecosystem of the links being shared, because I think for some people the answer to the question, what is social media for, it's almost like the comment room of the internet.
Mhm.
It's the comment section that is all over the place, and Twitter really, with their retweet function that is different than what Facebook does when they do retweets or reposts, Twitter really does, with their functionality, allow for this conversational back and forth in a way that other websites don't. And so when people say they want something like Twitter, they're looking for the comment section, which is kind of funny because people always knock like reading the comment section on the internet. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
wait, you're on Twitter. You like
Right.
the comment section because you're looking for the commentary before reading the article. Otherwise, we would just all go back to Challies and other newsletters that are like newsletters are filling this function. Anyways, back to you, Austin.
Yeah, no, what you described is how the internet used to work. And the thing that I have seen, and I'm not poking at any individual specifically. I've seen this from multiple people, and I also really strongly sympathize with this desire myself. Like this is not a me poking the finger at any one in particular, but I've seen over and over again, especially people in our circles, this desire to go back to the old Twitter because specifically Bluesky doesn't throttle links, because the old way of sharing links, kind of like an RSS feed, kind of like you described, Andrew, uh, Bluesky is the closest to that in a internet ecosystem where that is not the norm anymore.
Wasn't
And
it okay to want that? Like who cares?
it's
Let's
okay
go
to
back.
it's
Let's
okay
roll
to,
back the clock on this one thing. And
it's okay
maybe
to
there
want
could be Twitter 2012 again.
it's okay to want to roll that back. I do not believe that Bluesky will ever reach the user base that Twitter originally had. And when we talk about the growth that Bluesky has, we need to talk about how growth is relative. Like, Bluesky just broke today, I think, 20 million users. In the context of social media, that is very small. There are subreddits, individual subreddits with 3 times the number of people in that. Last week, there was a devastating headline by The Verge last week where it said Threads grows a Bluesky in a single week. Like, Threads in a single week gained 15 million new accounts, which is the entire, as of last week, that's since changed, as of last week, the entire size of the platform. So yes, the platform is growing, but growth is also relative. And so we can want an internet that is the way that we would prefer the internet to be. My fear, and this has been the biggest challenge that I've had to tackle ever since taking on my role as the social media manager for the Gospel Coalition, is coming to terms with the fact that the internet ecosystem as a whole is changing, and we have to reckon with that, and we have to acknowledge that and deal with that as it is. And Bluesky, and the fact that they don't throttle links, is actually a bug now. Like, the feature of the internet and the feature of social media specifically is keeping you where you're at and not letting you leave to go somewhere else. So Bluesky is an outlier on that. And if Bluesky gets to a point where it introduces any kind of advertiser functionality, they're going to have to face the same incentives to keep people on their site, just like X does, just like Facebook does, because that's how they're going to make their money. So it's only a matter of time before this platform faces the same ecological incentives that everyone's trying to get away from, especially if it grows.
Right. That's helpful.
Well, I was
Joel.
going to say, well, 2 things. One, it's interesting to see like platforms that get a lot of users. Like, I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, there was something like Google Plus,
Oh yeah.
and they were like, "Oh, we have like all of these users, and like we crossed like basically similar to Facebook, but no one was actually using it." So there's like the number of users, and then there's actual usage, like how hollow that network is. So I'm actually interested. I haven't ever given Bluesky a chance, but I'm like, okay, I'm interested to like go and see like, is it really like this thriving sort of ecosystem? And that's one thing I would just like to myself. But the second thing that also drives me to be like, okay, let's the curiosity card. Let's go see. Is that looking into it when Jack Dorsey kind of originally proposed it as a project under Twitter back, I think it was supposed to be a decentralized social platform. And
Yes.
I think you know a lot more than me on that because you have been, as a social media manager, really researching up, but I've never really thought of what does a decentralized platform look like where you can like take your network and move it between different social media platforms. So from a tech user point of view, I'm like, oh, this does seem interesting for me to understand. Although, like you said, it's probably still in the early days to understand. What does this mean? What does this change mean? Is the internet going to change more with decentralized social networks, or is that just a buzzword?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. Decentralization, if you don't know what that term is, refers to a fundamentally new model of social media, where you kind of have the best of both worlds, in that you can get content from anywhere on the terms that you prefer. And what I mean by that is decentralization and platforms that participate in that, which right now includes Mastodon. Mastodon's the biggest driver of the decentralized Fediverse social media movement. Bluesky, and technically Threads. Threads actually does have Fediverse support. You can turn Fediverse sharing on and contribute to the decentralized aspect of Threads. But what it allows you to do is you can pick whichever platform you prefer to be on and still see content from other platforms. So it's an aggregate functionality of sorts, but it's not an aggregator on the top end. It's something that's built in foundationally to the platform, to where you're not siloed into, well, I only spend time on this platform, so I only see the content on this platform. No, there's actually support for you to pull in stuff from other places too. It's very complicated. It's like, go try to sign up for a Mastodon server and tell me how user friendly it is. I promise you, it is the most unintuitive headache that you could ever have in a social media context. The promise and the potential of decentralization is actually really interesting, but the barrier to entry just for the average person is so high that it's gonna be a while before we see any kind of like mass adoption of that, and people really take off and use it, which is going to be what has to happen for this to reach its full potential. Like if this remains kind of a niche feature, it's just going to be a niche tech feature that's not going to meaningfully change anything.
Yeah. And you think a lot of the people are moving not for decentralization. There's probably now like cohorts. There are people who are like, oh, I want to like move because of decentralization. There's people who are moving because they're like, I like the linking out feature and it's not link throttling. And then there's people who are moving up because it's like, oh, I want to have a different media bubble, right? I don't want to see Elon's tweets,
Yes.
which, are being definitely amplified. And I don't want to see maybe like right-wing content or something.
Yes.
Like that, which we're seeing is like contributing to the growth, really aligning to like post the election.
Yes.
As well. So
totally. Well, and that's a
Yeah.
combination too, because there could be a desire to move left, but there could also be on principle, I do not want my social media company run by someone in government. Like, regardless of who's in the government, like there should be some distinction between the two, because if the social media platform is supposed to function like the free press or some sort of free market of ideas, then it being in bed with the government has issues. So I think what we're in right now is, I think people are like, the wild thing about this era that we're currently in is that there's a lot changing, and it gets dumbed down at the common level to, oh, this is Musk or this is Zuckerberg, when it's actually like, no, there's entire reasons for these social media companies making these decisions from a monetary perspective because of the way incentive structures are established. Like, we're in a people are not trusting institutions. People don't want to follow the New York Times as much as they want to follow the New York Times. They're still making money, but like all these other journalistic organizations, they're not making money, but the journalists are when they go to Substack or whatever, and they're big enough there. And so you have this shift, and then all of a sudden you're building individuals getting their own individual followings rather than these corporations. And so then it kind of allows for different things happening because of that. And so, like, I'm kind of curious, going back to this earlier point about external links being downlisted. And I think I've seen a shift in TGC's content that you've been a part of, Austin. And like, you're like, no, I'm going to post the entire interview with Michael Horton on Twitter. Like, we're just going to post the whole thing there. And like, you see other big creators doing this too, like the ones who are ahead of the curve generally, like Mr. Beast or what, some of these other, like, they do this kind of stuff too, and they make money off of it. And they know that some people, they don't want to click off of the platform. They want to go and stay within a platform in order to learn and have ideas and things like that. Like, how many people click bookmark for something but never revisit the bookmark because they
Right.
don't actually want to. If they actually cared about it, they would stop and go and read the article. And so I just think it's an interesting phenomena, a set of phenomena coming together. And it's kind of like, is Bluesky the answer? Well, it might be this other thing. Like for myself, I can see myself using Bluesky. Sorry, there it is again. Using Bluesky alongside Twitter and Threads through something called Buffer. Buffer allows
Yep.
me to write the tweet, send out the tweet to 3 platforms, and then the 3 different platforms will give me different people responding in different ways, and that's okay. And I can manage it that way. And I can do that with a free account across 3 platforms max, and those are the 3 that I've chose. I tried to set up a Mastodon account and it was too complicated.
Dude, it sucks. It's Mastodon. Mastodon is awful from a user standpoint. Like only the nichest of nerds use that thing. It's awful.
Right. And I haven't committed, like there's a commitment that some Christian thought leaders or whoever you are listening, that you need to decide, am I going to use social media for the sake of influencing for kingdom purposes? Like, are you doing that? Yes or no? Is that part of your life? Is it part of your quote unquote ministry? I get that you want to value in-person stuff. Listen to our past episode on the internet culture to like help unpack some of what we believe about, yes, posting on the internet has its place. It is important. I'm not personally at the point of like, I'm going to use it for changing the world and influencing and things like that. That's kind of like a tertiary motive for me. I'm not opposed to it. I'm kind of like thinking out loud, thinking with others, learning with others. I find social media is helpful for that context for me. But I can see other people who are trying to do that. And it's like, why would you leave Twitter? Are you crazy? Like, it's like the user base is huge. Why would you leave? So that's one aspect too.
Well, I need to name that point specifically, especially for the people in our circles, Andrew, because I mean, you wouldn't believe the stuff that I see targeted at my organization and the people associated with my organization that they deal with on a daily basis on X. Like, if for some of these people, I completely understand why they would want to get away from that, because it is some of the darkest stuff you would ever see from Christians aiming at Christians. And so I want to acknowledge that up front, that like I see that stuff and it's horrible. And I don't blame anyone who is like, I'm not about this. I don't want to, I'm not ready to deal with this, or I'm not able to deal with this, or I can't deal with this. I just need to go somewhere else. I completely understand that. I need that myself. Like there are days where, depending upon how bad we're getting hit on, where it's like, yeah, mentally I'm kind of shaking a little bit. Like that's some dark stuff. But to go back to the influencing question, I am worried about what happens when people who have been given gifts to persuade and lead people to the truth decide to silo with people who are mostly like them. And I think bad things happen when that happens. And we've seen that play out in real time recently. I mean, you look at the legacy media as a whole and their response to this election and how completely caught off guard they were by it. That is an institution that has siloed itself only among its peers, does not meaningfully have to interact with those outside of them, and then is just absolutely shocked when nobody has been listening to what they're saying. Like, the media has just absolutely flabbergasted of like, we did 4 years of reporting on how dangerous Trump is and how much he's a threat to American democracy and all of his crimes and all of the scandals and all of these things. And nobody listened. They were only talking amongst themselves because those were the things they were wanting to talk about with each other. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be called to influence, but we can see, even on Substack. I mean, we saw this, we've seen this now with Substack at this point, where there's kind of a silo effect that's already happened with Substack, where a lot of the people that went to Substack who have stayed primarily on Substack, they're not writing to persuade people who are not like them. They're writing really for their peers. And there's nothing wrong with that in principle. But if you've been given gifts to reason and persuade people to the truth or to wise and virtuous living, you can't just pull back from those difficult spaces where people need to hear the hard things you have to say. And
Mhm.
that's hard. But that just comes with the territory. And I'm not saying that everyone who's going to Bluesky is like never going to post on Facebook or X or whatever again. Like people post to multiple accounts. But I've seen this play out before. We just saw it play out with the election. And I don't want to see that play out with a group of people who I genuinely respect and look up to, and who I believe people need to hear more of and not less of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this trend, one of my mentors told me, because I was telling him, I wanted to move to America because Canada is a more challenging environment, more maybe like straining on, Christian values and principles and ethics. And he's like, no, but we need people to stay here and be the light.
Mhm.
And it's kind of this tension between like, okay, like, yeah, like it's hard. It's hard to be, in dark environments, right? To be like an evangelist or like a missionary, right? Going into these places where the gospel isn't really commonly shared and being that light, it's hard. And at the same time, it is something we're called to. And then at the same time, we have to have wisdom, for our families. So
Right.
there's such a tension in balancing it, right?
There is. And I'm not saying anybody is compelled that they must or must not do a certain
Right.
thing. I just know from myself that I prefer to spend time with people who are like me, who like the things I like, who want to talk about things I want to talk
It's
about
natural.
in the way that I want to talk about that. That's natural, that's normal. But I know that part of what God has gifted me with is not meant just for my peers, it's meant for my neighbor. And often my neighbor is not someone who is like me. And I have to be able to use those gifts in that way.
Yeah, and I think so. We need to think about then if we're posting in any way, we are a Christian influencer. You are a thought leader. Like so. Why limit yourself to just one platform? Why not use multiple? Is kind
Mhm.
of one logic. I think there is a difficulty with each platform has its own kind of tones and connotations and things. And so I can understand the desire to like, oh, I don't want to learn every platform. And I can get that, but there is a decent level of consistency across, at least like in my view, Threads, Mastodon, Twitter, and Bluesky all have a lot of similarities in terms of text-based back and forth and that sort of thing. I think one of the differences and one of the things we haven't brought up yet is some people want to leave Twitter because Twitter is using tweets to, and I know it's X and post, but I don't care. I'm going to call it Twitter because
Yeah.
that's what makes sense for people. They use the data to train their AI, and some people like the idea of Bluesky, which isn't going to train their AI off of it, which is a whole other ethical debate that we should have at some point. We don't need to get into it
Mhm.
now because, like, wait, shouldn't we want the AI to be influenced by our own tweets? Like, if you're tweeting for the
Yeah.
sake of influence, wouldn't you want the AI to have reasoned understanding of what a Christian view is? So anyways, that's a whole other kind of tangent
Yeah.
that we could
I
go down.
think I think the interesting aspect of that tangent though is, when you're comparing like the size of Twitter or X, and Musk's like vision of making it this super app, which will do like payments, which will have like Grok AI embedded, which will like have all these like interconnectivities with his other companies, right? I think kind of moving away from that platform, you're inevitably going to miss out on some of these like features. And I think,
Yeah.
some people are like, oh, he's not really going to integrate it, but you know, uh, his next, I think Tesla like supercar is going to have SpaceX engine on it or something like that. So it's like
To the
he
moon.
isn't afraid to kind of like blur the lines between the IP that he has at his different organizations. So I think, yeah, like you said, AI being one of them, like how's Blue Sky going to build like a whole AI team, right? what are they going to do to combat those type of feature advancements that ideally should improve your social experience?
Yeah, and let's actually talk about AI, and let's go back to uh, link suppression for a second. How many Google searches do y'all think end without a click to a website? Like people search for a thing and that just ends. What do you think that number is? Percentage wise, fraction wise, what do you think?
70%, 80% maybe.
Okay.
Like
Joel?
it's got to be high because in my own experience, it's pretty high.
I think it's probably gone up. I think it's going up even more because now they're doing their AI generated responses, right? But before I would it would have these pre-canned responses, and then before that you'd have to click on a link.
Yeah, pre Gemini, it was 2/3. Solid marketing data that like even before they rolled out Gemini, they had gotten so good at doing this zero click content summarization that Google wasn't actually driving traffic anymore. It was serving what you were wanting directly in your search without requiring you to then further go and get it. And that's what I was talking about earlier, like the fundamental shift of the internet ecosystem is that's not the outlier. That principle is manifesting itself everywhere, especially
that's a really good point
on social media. Here's some data from my side of the fence. I've actually not talked about this data publicly. I'm hoping I have mountains of data on this. I've been researching it all year. I cannot wait to get to a point where I can maybe get some of this stuff packaged and public. But here's some numbers I can talk about. In 2023, TGC's entire social media footprint, so all of its major flagship platforms, I'm not talking side channels or anything like that.
TGC Canada doesn't count. That is
TGC
not managed.
Actually, no, TGC Canada doesn't count. I am just
that's
talking,
what I mean.
Yeah.
You're just talking the main channel. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2023, 113 million impressions. So impressions being the number of times eyeballs user viewed, yes, posts. Of that 113 million impressions, which by the way, that is a lot. Like TGC is not the biggest Christian organization in the social media space, but that's a lot for a Christian organization. Like that's quite a bit. Out of all of that, only had 1.7 million clicks. Said another way, 98.5% of the time people saw our content
and did not click.
Eyeballs just kept on scrolling by. So the shift that I made was, instead of saying, well, how do we get 1.7 million clicks and how do we make that number bigger? I said, okay, well, how do we take these 113 million impressions and make those as influential and impactful as possible? Because if we could, and the crux of my model is that I was betting, and I've won that bet and I have the data to prove it, that I could increase TGC's readership by treating our engagement rate as a proxy metric for URL clicks, and that our engagement rates would show, if we publish the entire article in its entirety, that our engagement rate would show that more people actually read the article natively on social than they would have by clicking to go and read it. And that data has borne out very strongly.
Which makes sense. It's where they're at. They end up, okay, I'm going to read a little bit of this. Oh, I'm going to keep reading. And we've all been in the situation where it's like, oh, do I really want to click? Because we've had the experience so often of clicking a link and then you get a pop-up, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Like that's been so normalized.
Yes.
So if it's a Substack link, if it's a TGC link, if it's Charlie's, you go to his website, there's going to be some pop-up.
The website reading experience.
And then the cookie, do you accept cookies?
Yes.
Do you want? It's like, well, I don't want to give everyone my cookies. Like I really enjoy my cookies, so I don't want to give them away for free. So yeah, it's built into our normal internet experience thanks to GDPR that every time you go to a new website, it's going to be effort. It's going to be effortful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
why
I think
not
that's a
keep
key
it on the
point.
same website? And I think
So
the other
yeah,
thing that does is it builds trust. It really does allow for someone who's reading the article that they wouldn't have otherwise be like, oh, this brand, I learned
It
something from them.
it single-handedly I was hoping for this to happen, but it happened way faster than even my most optimistic expectations. It single-handedly took TGC's comment sections, which were notorious dumpster fires, almost overnight, completely cleaned them up. I'm not exaggerating. This single-handedly deterred all of the drive-by grifters from jumping in and talking crap, because the stakes for public accountability were that much higher, because they couldn't say something about this article knowing that people weren't going to click on it and go verify it for themselves. The
Right.
whole record is there.
It's not
And they're
about
not going to.
dunking when there's people saying, oh, I just read this and appreciated it, because they just
Yes.
read it and appreciated it.
Well,
And they're there to comment.
guys, I cannot stress, when I came into this role in August of 2023, how bad it was, and then how rapidly it shifted in the opposite direction when we started doing this. So when and this took some conversation with TDC leadership, and to give them credit, they have been very supportive of me in this. I have not had any pushback on my research and the data that I've presented. It's counterintuitive, and it definitely took some back and forth, but I've had nothing but the highest level of support that I could ask for on this. But when we were willing to let go of how we preferred people to read our stuff, on our beautiful website and this smooth reading experience, and when we were willing to let go of that and meet people where they were at with our content and what we had to say, we benefited from it, and so did our audience. And so when it comes to Substack, and when it comes to posting long form stuff on X and stuff, it's like, I understand that we all have our Substacks and our websites that we pay money for, and that we want to make, we would prefer people read our stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were willing to let go of our way of doing things and stare the current internet ecosystem in the face and see what we're dealing with and respond to that, you may actually see your work go further if you're willing to let go of holding on to, it must be done this way. It must be done by driving traffic to my Substack, to my website. What if it does? What if there's another way? Like, what if there's another way to actually get your work out and influencing more people than by going back to the way it once was? Because I don't think that's ever coming back.
There are two big insights here, right? One being the click-through rate you mentioned from impressions to click-through is actually kind of industry average. If you're talking about ads or anything, it's 0.5%, 2%, 10% is okay, that's really good, right? So what you guys were seeing is actually kind of normal impression to click-through rate, but leaning into the data further is click-through rate really what you want to optimize for?
Yeah.
And especially in, this area where you're actually trying to optimize for how many people hear the message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily how many people go and see your website. And I think when you have that lens, and you said the follow-on effects it's had has also been valuable, that's really insightful. And the follow-on effects is Andrew, what you're saying about trust is, when you go to these third-party websites, you can just type your name and post. So it's kind of anonymized. But on Twitter or wherever, you have a blue check mark. So if you post something bad, other people will be able to see and associate that with your identity, right? So I think it just by the platform infrastructure raises the quality of engagement as well. So these are huge insights.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that driving traffic, wanting to drive traffic, is a bad thing. I mean, we still do that in our social footprint. We do that through our paid ad campaigns. So we're still doing that. But to circle all the way back to Bluesky, it's I understand. Y'all want to people want to get their work out. They want their ideas and their writings to be seen and to be heard, and for people to consider what they have to say. I just don't think trying to go back to the way to the golden age of Twitter reappearing in this new platform is actually the best way to do that. And if we were to really reckon with the way the internet is now and lean into it, we might find ourselves in a new golden age of sorts where we're able to do things and see fruit that maybe we haven't seen before. But if we continue to insist, it's like, no, it's got to be this way, then we're going to miss out.
Yeah. Yeah, I came into this conversation without expectations, but I have been thoroughly impressed by what I'm walking with.
Yeah, it's a different. One of the things that recently struck me was the cost. I mean, I always knew this, but someone estimated a dollar value of how much it cost Paul to write each one of his letters. So it was like $2,000 for him to write Romans. It was like $700 USD for him to write Philippians. They just basically took a word count and did some estimations based around cost of distribution. And they're like, yeah. And it's just interesting to think about. I know we're not writing scripture, but Paul he was writing letters to encourage churches, and he was really willing to invest for the sake of a wide audience, and the letters would be copied and reproduced, and we know kind of the story about, but they put money into it. One of the things that I've reflected on, because I got Twitter Blue like a year and a half ago or whatever, and I saw the value of it. It's not my primary goal to influence, but I see the value of investing into a platform that I want to get things out of it. I want to have threads where I can go beyond the character limit. I see the benefits of it. I recently convinced Wyatt Graham to get the blue check mark. And then he goes viral within literal days, like 100,000 plus clicks, or 100,000 plus views on some of his tweets as he engages thoughtfully on some of these different things. And so it's like, there's opportunity for Christians to invest even their own money in these platforms, in broadening their reach. And there's this really weird, again, it's like the way that was 10 years ago is the best way. It's like, oh yeah, it was free 10 years ago, it should always be free, I never want to pay money. It's like another one of those paradigm shifts that I'm thinking about. But anyways, I think this has been a very helpful context for Bluesky. I think you should get TGC on Bluesky though. Still, Austin. Like, I don't think TGC has an. I know you're busy podcasting right now.
I've already parked the handle. I actually have parked the handle. I own all of TGC's handles everywhere.
Good work
for security purposes.
Yeah, as soon as there's a new platform, you need to immediately get the TGC tag, right? Because it's not just the Gospel Coalition. TGC is huge to get that, because isn't it like an anime thing or something? Sorry.
Yeah. That's a whole nother rant for another time, dude. You would not
searched
believe
Bluesky for the Gospel Coalition, and I saw some negative comments, about TGC, and then I saw some anime stuff, so I was confused.
Yeah,
but you got to get TGC on Bluesky. That's my point.
I already own the Gospel Coalition handle. No comment as to whether we will actually start up there. Not saying
you got to have some internal meetings. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm gonna wait it out a little bit just to see before I decide to make any moves there on that.
Okay. Yeah. Jumping on bandwagons probably isn't the cleanest of decisions. So, all right. But for now, I'm gonna join Bluesky. You can join us on Bluesky. Me and Austin are on it. Joel, you should just stay on LinkedIn, man. You ride out the LinkedIn wave, because Christian leaders totally miss LinkedIn as an avenue.
No, you are so right. I have been one of the biggest surprises about my job has been LinkedIn is actually kind of awesome, and none of the people that I pay attention to, I listen to regularly, are there, and it just kind of blows my mind. There's just such an
untapped
market,
ocean, to be honest. Yeah.
Yes.
It really is.
Gosh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Tied together the business and Christian, we're doing this new startup for building wells in this country, and it's like
But
those
it
type
doesn't
of
have to be
business
that. It can
Christian
have other
integrate.
aspects. But yeah, no, it can definitely have that too. I think, yeah, there should be. I haven't figured out how to do that. If I could sync it with my buffer, maybe I would. Maybe I should look into that. Anyways, this has been a very interesting episode. Yeah, you can follow us on social media. I am in charge of our What Would Jesus Tech social accounts. Austin, if you ever want to take those over and grow them to the moon like you do with TGC stuff, you are welcome to anytime. But I also respect that it's your full-time job, whereas it's just a nice add-on to my life. So anyways, thanks for listening. Thank you to those who support us on Patreon. Yeah, it's patreon.com/WWJT. And you can also just find it on our website. Our website is whatwouldjesustech.com. Very easy to find that. It costs money for us to keep that domain every year, but that's okay. We have some Patreon supporters to do that. And thank you for listening. Use tech, find rest, glorify God, and find green grass under blue skies. Take care.
See y'all.
See you guys.